I'm so excited you're here. Welcome to the first video in the countdown to Thanksgiving. It's just about November, and we're going to start off our Thanksgiving recipes with stuffing. Homemade from scratch stuffing, which is my favorite part of a Thanksgiving meal. Now this recipe is a little involved, I'm not going to lie to you. It is our sandwich bread recipe and our baguette recipe put together, cooked in a sheet pan, and then dried and then chopped, and there's herbs involved, but you're going to love the time you spend on this later this year and into next year, because this recipe literally will give you 2 years worth of stuffing cubes for stuffing. So make it for this year, make it for next year, and along the way you can also have croutons out of these stuffing cubes. You can grind up the stuffing cubes and make an herbed breadcrumb. So there's a lot of uses. Okay, so what we're going to do, I have broken down this process to be as efficient as possible because we're making 2 batches. And so we're going to start with our sandwich bread. If you would like to see the entire sandwich bread recipe where we actually make loaves of bread, I will put that link right up here. And then once we mix the sandwich bread recipe, we're going to roll right into the French baguette recipe, which again, if you want to watch the whole video, I'll put that link up here. And really the only addition to both of these recipes from the original is an herb blend. So this is a blend that I put together. It is parsley, thyme, rosemary, marjoram, and sage. And this is going to give it that stuffing herbiness. And so there'll be a link to the full recipe below, and then this mixture of the herb blend will be in there. And so you make a bigger batch, a batch enough for 2, and then we're going to put a certain amount in each one of these mixes. So I am going to jump right in. I've got my heated carbonated water in my measuring cup right here. I'm going to start swirling and then adding the yeast. And as I always say, if it's not bubbling at this point, there's something wrong, and don't go move forward. That means you have bad yeast or you didn't carbonate your water. Okay, so I've got my water ready, and I've got my wet here, and I've got my dry already in the mixing bowl, and then I also have the herbs. So I'm going to start just mixing up all the dry ingredients to distribute them. And then now you don't have to do the 2-armed method, that's just what I do. So I slowly pour from each direction. And then you're probably going to need a spoon to get some of this honey out of here. Okay. Okay, I'm putting up to 2 now that it's all incorporated. And now this is when I'm going to put the herb mixture in. Now make sure you're on 2 or less, otherwise you'll have a mess. And it all goes in. I'm going to move it up to 3, let it mix for about 30 seconds, then go to 4 for a minute, and then 5 for another minute. So we are all mixed and ready to go. I've got a bowl of warm water here. I'm sticking my hand in because otherwise everything that I'm going to take off of this paddle is going to stick to my hand really badly. It'll just stick a little with the warm water. I can smell the herb mixture. Oh, this is going to be so delicious. So let me show you what the dough should look like. For this recipe, for the sandwich bread, it's a lot wetter than some of our other recipes. But it's still not a batter, and it's definitely not a dough. It's very silky and creamy, and it has a lot of pliability to it. So I have the bowl off of the mixer, and I am dipping my spatula into hot water. And so I'm scraping down into the bowl to get it off of the edges. And we're going to take this entire bowl of dough, and I have sprayed this sheet pan liberally with nonstick spray. And so I'm just going to take all of this dough and put it onto the sheet pan. Okay, put this aside. Now what we're going to do is we're going to spread this around the sheet pan. It is going to be sticky, so you're going to want to get lots of water on your hands. But when you have water on your hands, it doesn't stick as bad. And if it's starting to stick a little bit more, then put some more water on your hands. Pretty much that's the way it works. You can see how it's not really sticking. because I have enough water. And I'm not using a really, heavy touch. It's a pretty light touch. The goal here is to get it into all the corners and to get it as level as you can. It doesn't have to be completely smooth, but it should be somewhat smooth. You could use a spatula to do this, but I like feeling the dough under my hands. To me, the spatula just takes that ability away. Okay, that looks pretty good. That spread very nicely. Okay, I feel really good about that. So now what I'm going to do is take this and put it on top of the oven, on the stove. The oven's set at 400 degrees, and I'm going to jump right in and mix the next batch. The bread recipe is sitting on top of the oven, waiting for its partner, the baguette recipe, to nestle in next to it so they can go for their rise. So I've got my water, my carbonated heated water. So I'm going to measure it out here. Okay. Whisk, yeast, get that going. Let me start this, let that get incorporated. So again, I've got water, wet, dry's already in the bowl, and then I've got the herb mixture here. I'm going to do the two-armed add slowly. Okay, we're good there. Let it incorporate before I turn it up some. I'm going to go up now. Now I'm going to get the herb mixture in. Okay, that's all in. Okay, it's looking good. I'm going to go up one more for about a minute. Whoop. And then another for about a minute too. So it's about 3 minutes total time of mixing. So the herbed baguette dough is done mixing. I'm going to lower the bowl, put my hand in some water again so I can get it off of the paddle. So this dough, it's a little thicker than the bread dough, but it's still very, very soft, feels very silky, pliable. Again, not a batter, not a dough, somewhere in between. Okay, so I'm going to dip my spatula in the water and then start pulling all the dough from the sides as I begin to put it onto the pan, which again is liberally sprayed with cooking spray. Okay, I've got it all in here. Putting my hands in the water, so we're going to start moving this around. Again, this is going to take a little bit more work than the sandwich bread recipe, but it's still, you can see, moving around nicely. And this is going to be a little bit thinner of a layer than the sandwich bread recipe. So think of the stuffing mixes. In my mind, the sandwich bread is kind of the star, even though it's completely half and half. It's just the way, the nature of both of these recipes and the way they cook up. The sandwich bread's going to be a little bit bigger, and the baguette's going to be a little bit smaller of a cube when we're done. The reason I use the two is because it makes a really good flavor and texture result, instead of being more one-notey if you're using just one type of bread. The texture of the French baguette is different than the texture of the sandwich bread and vice versa, so I really like the way it turns out with these two. See, that wasn't too bad. It's like I said, a tighter dough, but it's still spread pretty nicely. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you don't want, like peaks and valleys in here either. So I am going to go put this next to the bread recipe on top of the stove and then set the timer for 20 minutes. They're going to rise for 20 minutes, and then we're going to get them in the oven. Okay, both have been on the stove for 20 minutes. They've done a nice rise, so I'm going to get them in the oven. Because we have two pans, I am going to, obviously put one on one rack, one on the other, and halfway through the baking, I'm going to flip them so they get some even cooking. They're going to take about 20 minutes to cook, so I am going to set my timer for 10 minutes. And then come back and flip them and cook them from the other 10 minutes. Okay, it's been 10 minutes, so I'm going to go in and I'm going to swap these out. Ooh, they're looking good. Okay, you go up here. Oh yeah, this one's even better looking. Well, they both look good. Okay, let's get you on the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to set the timer for 10 more minutes, and I'm going to check them. They may need a little bit more, but I think we're going to be pretty close in 10 more minutes. Okay, they are ready. I did let them go about 4 minutes more than the 20 minutes because I felt like they needed it for some color. So there's the baguette, and here is the sandwich bread. So I'm going to put that over here. Okay, so the goal is to get this out of this pan as soon as possible, so it should slide right out. There we go. Okay, one out. Now on the baguette and even on the sandwich bread, you can see how it has pulled away from the pan. That's another telltale sign that you are done, and it's just moving around in here. I just really got to get, there we go. Okay. So we have both of these out. We're going to let them cool about 10, 15 minutes, and then we're going to come back in and we're going to cut them into cubes. And then we're going to put them back in the oven to dry them out. Baguette, the herbed baguette bread has been cooling here for about 15 minutes. The herb sandwich bread, it was also cooling. It's thicker, so it's going to take a while to cool down. So I put the whole thing in the freezer. So it's going to chill in the freezer, literally, while we cut this, and then we're going to grab it and cut it as well. So I'm taking my cooling rack and putting it in a sheet pan, and I'm going to slice and dice this guy here. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is cut it in half, so I have a smaller piece to work with. You can see that this is a lot thinner. That's fine. That's the baguette recipe. That's what it does in this situation. So the goal is to cut the cubes in about, say, a 1 inch by 1 inch. If you want bigger cubes, make bigger cubes. If you want smaller cubes, do that. But be careful with the getting too small, because we're going to put these back in the oven to dry them out and make them more crunchy, which will make for a much better stuffing or a crouton. Okay, so I'm going to cut across this way. And you don't have to cut perfect. It can be a little irregular because, I mean, getting these exactly the same size can be challenging. So we've got our one direction cut. So you can do this or you can break it up. I think I'm going to break it up so I have a little bit more control. So now I'm going to cut this way. And then as you cut, to get them out of your way, you're going to put them on the cooling rack. The reason we're using a cooling rack is so that the air really circulates around them when they go in the oven again. So if you have some trouble cutting into these because the bottom is very, very brown, which is good, it's what you want, this is flavor, flip them over and then cut them. They seem to cut a little better because that bottom can be a little tough. So, and don't worry about crowding on here. This should be fine. Try to keep them on here, though. That's always the challenge. So I've got it all cut. What you're going to want to do is distribute this so you don't have as little. You want to have as little overlapping as possible. Now the bread is thicker, so what's most likely going to happen is I'm going to need 2 pans of to dry the bread in. So I'm going to go ahead and get these in the oven. They're going to be in for 20 minutes at 350 degrees. And when they're done, then I'm going to cut the bread and spread it amongst 2 sheet pans and then get that cooked as well. Okay, so while the baguette version is in the oven drying out, I went and I checked on the bread and it was cool enough. For this one, I'm going to go ahead and cut it in the quarters. I think it's going to be easier to slice. So you do whatever works for you, but I'm going to do the quarters here. Here's one pan ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and cut these, and I only have 2 cooling racks and can only put 2 pans in the oven at one time. So I'm going to wait for the other cooling rack when the baguette is done, and then I will put the rest of this on that and then get that in the oven. The herbed baguettes are ready to come out of the oven after drying for about 25 minutes actually, because I wanted to make sure that they were nice and crunchy. So what are you looking for? How dry do you want them? They're nice and crunchy on the outside, but they've still got a little bit of give, a little chew on the inside. That's exactly what you want. You don't want it to be completely dried all the way through, because then there's really not going to be anything to reconstitute when you make your stuffing. So you can see how I can kind of squish them a little, but not too much. I mean, they've got a crust all the way around, and they're nice and brown in areas. I mean, and they feel, I don't know if you can hear that, they feel crunchy, or they sound crunchy and feel crunchy too. So, okay, so these guys are good. And now, the cooling rack is hot. Be aware of that, as I just found out. I'm going to put the other batch of bread on here. Now, these bread cubes are probably going to cook for a little bit longer because they're thicker and they have a little bit more moisture content. So I'm going to start them at 20 minutes, check them, but I have a feeling they're going to go about 30 minutes. So now, while these are drying out, I am going to start working on the actual stuffing. Now, I don't recommend doing this process and then making your stuffing in the same day. It's a lot of work, but since I'm doing the video, I'm going to do that for you. So I'm going to start chopping some onions and celery and make stuffing. Okay, this has been a process, but it's well going to be worth it when we're all done and we're nearing the finish line. So I've got the baguette stuffing cubes here. I've got the bread ones in front of me, plus another pan back there. We're going to marry it all together in this bowl, and then we're going to portion it out. So I'm going to take just about the whole bowl of this, which I don't know if this is all going to fit in one bowl. So what we're going to do is then we're going to do half of this pan and mix up as we go. Okay, we get about a little bit more. I think that's about half. That looks good to me, and I'm going to mix it all together. Oh, you cannot leave the pan or the bowl. Okay, so I'm going to call this pretty distributed well. So you're going to want, if you're making stuffing, a batch of stuffing, you're going to want 16 ounces. So I have my bowl on the scale, and I've got it set to ounces. And so I'm just going to put some in until I get to 16 ounces. Oh, now I can see. Okay, I need the reading glasses here. Okay, where are we at? We're almost there. 15.8. 16.24. Okay, that's good. Okay, so now this bowl is already mixed. So what you're going to want to do, I'm going to put this aside because we're actually going to make some stuffing now, is this is probably about 16 ounces as well. Put it in a freezer bag and, right on it, put it in the freezer. So this will make you another batch of stuffing. Or if you're going to do 2 batches, then obviously you have all you need for stuffing. And then with what's left, you're going to get another 2 batches, 16 ounce each. So you can choose to leave that in your freezer for a year, which it will hold in a year. Just make sure I would double bag it in freezer bags. And so next year you don't have to go through this process. You've got stuffing. Or I don't know, it could be, March and you're like, I really want some stuffing. Pull it out, make some stuffing. Or you could decide to take one of those bags and grind them up as breadcrumbs. That's something you could do too. Or periodically get into that bag, pull some cubes out and use them as croutons. You have lots of options. So now you can see why we made such a big batch, so that you do it basically once a year. So I am going to roll right into doing the actual stuffing recipe. Now this is my sausage stuffing that I make every year at Thanksgiving. I bake it in this ceramic pot. You can bake it in a stainless steel baking pan, whatever you choose to use. So I'm going to take the top off for now. And I'm going to add in our stuffing cubes. And then I've already mise en place everything else out. I've got melted earth balance, and then I've got chicken stock, some celery and onions that I've sweated. I have a breakfast sausage that I have cooked down fully. So the first thing I'm going to add, and you may not use all of your celery and onion, you just got to decide how much you want. So that's why I put it in with the stuffing cubes. I'm going to use a fair amount of this. I like a lot of celery and onion in here, but you may not, so use a little or use it all. I'm just going to go ahead and use almost all of it. And same thing with the sausage. I cooked the whole pound because, it comes in a pound, and makes no sense to leave a quarter pound. And so I'm just going to put the sausage in until I get the distribution or percentage, I think, the stuffing to sausage percentage I'm looking for, which I'm probably going to use about 3/4 of a pound. Okay, I got that in there. And you can use a spoon to do this. I just like to get my hands in everything. In a minute here, I'm going to use a spoon because I'm going to put the liquid in, and that's going to be way too messy. Okay, first I'm going to go with the earth balance. And what this is going to do between the butter and the chicken stock is it's going to reconstitute what you just dried out. How weird is that? It's like, okay, it was all nice and soft, then we dried it out, and now we're going to reconstitute it. But that's how stuffing works. You got to get that structure to the stuffing cubes, otherwise they'll just go to mush. Okay, so I've got the spoon in here, and I'm mixing this up. It's kind of got like a spoon hand process going on. Okay, yep, and you're going to see some moisture at the bottom. That's perfectly wonderful. Okay, you're probably not going to need too much salt and pepper. Because I've made this many times, I'm just going to add a smidgen of salt and a smidgen of pepper. You can also season it when it comes out of the oven, but I don't think you're going to need to. Kind of mix that up. A little bit more. Okay. So I'm going to put a lid on it, put it in a 350-degree oven for 30 minutes, and I'm going to go in and take the lid off and cook it for another 15 because that's going to give you a little crunchy on the top. If you don't want the crunchy on the top, just pull it out after 30 minutes. If you want the crunchy, obviously put it back in for 15 uncovered. It's been a long day, but I am so excited that the stuffing is out of the oven and it looks amazing. It's got a nice brown crunchy top to it, which is what you want by leaving it in that 15 minutes with the lid off. And so I'm just not going to waste any time. I'm going to jump right in. I cannot wait to eat this. I haven't had stuffing in, I think it's been since last year. I didn't make it during the year this year for some reason. I don't know. Wasn't in the mood. Okay, here we go. I'm going in. Oh, it is so, so good. Now, I will say, I wish I would have cut my cubes a little bit smaller. The bread especially is a little big. So when you do yours, be kind of conscious of the size of your cubes. When you do go through the drying process, they get a little bit smaller, but they don't get exceptionally smaller. But other than that, it is just absolutely wonderful. I'm going to go for another bite. What I love so much is the texture is soft yet firm. It's not turning to mush. You have a little bit of crunchiness on some of the pieces, which is good. There's a lot of variation. And the sausage brings so much flavor to this stuffing. And then the onions and the celery. Oh, it's just absolutely fabulous. I really do love stuffing. Thank you so much for being along on this journey. This is the first video in our countdown to Thanksgiving. Next week, we're going to have pumpkin pie from scratch, cranberry sauce from scratch, and a bonus cranberry liqueur from scratch. That stuff is amazing, and you'll be drinking it all year. A link to the full recipe for the stuffing cubes and the stuffing recipe itself will be in the description below, or go to gfexplorers.com. And until next time, happy eating.